Let's take a few minutes and talk about the criteria for choosing a good book. What makes a good book? If we want to help create lifelong readers by choosing books that appeal to the greatest range and number of children, we need to view the book as a whole instead of focusing on only a small element of it. And the most trustworthy standard for viewing the whole book is to look at the experience it offers. Titles of lasting value can almost be defined as experiences that recreate the very texture of life. And people often don't see eye to eye when it comes to judging whether a book is worthwhile, because good book is a common phrase with two different definitions, one based on quality and the other on taste. So first let's look at quality, as it has to do with literary merit. So quality has nothing to do with how old or new a book is. Books from decades or centuries past are not necessarily better works. Even some so-called classics are not well written. However, the exact recipe for solid writing does not exist. If it did, anyone privy to the formula could predictably crank out an award winner. As W. Somerset Maugham once said, "There are 3 rules for writing a good novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are." However, there are some characteristics that exist in good books. There are actually 13 literary elements that go into writing a good book. We won't go into the details, but we will list them here. The first is style and language, and then character, plot, pacing, setting, tension, mood, tone, point of view, theme, accuracy, illustrations, and the design and layout. Now, of those 13 elements that I just listed, 3 provide most of the information for judging the quality or the literary merit of fiction. That would be style and language, which is how the story is told, as it's important to itself. It's the way a writer manipulates the language, the style of the writer. The second is character. How well do we get to know the people in the book? Are they unique? Are they believable? Do we want to love them? Do we want to hate them? Do we love to love them or love to hate them? Character is an important part of fiction. And finally is plot. Is the plot feasible? Things happen to characters in a way that makes sense and that makes us care about the outcome. There's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end. There's rising action, there's falling action. There's intense moments and there's slow moments. So the plot is a critical element of establishing good fiction. So when a book reveals a story in powerful language, has memorable characters, and follows a compelling plot, the fiction can generally be said to have quality. So that's what sets up quality in a book. But just because something has good quality or merit, based on its literary merit, not everyone is going to embrace that, because we all have our own taste. So the second definition of a good book is simply a book the reader likes, whether it's quality or not. So when determining which books are good, a problem surfaces. The positive feelings a reader has about a book are the same whether they come from a quality book or one of low literary merit. As long as a reader likes a book, quality or not, it's called good. Because a book can be written well or badly, and a reader can respond well or badly to both strong and weak books. So when we look at the diagram here on this slide, Quadrant 1 shows that an author has written a book with literary merit, and the reader likes it. We have no problems with a reader who responds positively to this quality writing. A well-crafted book deserves no less. Similarly, Quadrant 4 presents no difficulty. the author displays little skill in producing a book of minimal merit, and the reader does not respond well to this flawed product. These two shaded quadrants pose a little problem for the teacher and the student. And we can talk about books that fit into those two quadrants. Quadrant 1 would be books like possibly To Kill a Mockingbird or Because of Winn-Dixie. And I'm going to let you think of what might fall into Quadrant 4 because I couldn't think of any off the top of my head. Okay? But those are the books that people just don't want to read. Right? But problems occur when a quality book is not well received. That's Quadrant 2. The author has written a good book, but the reader just doesn't like it. Teachers who recognize quality may have a tendency to feel they are shirking their duty if children don't respond favorably to a quality book. But then we're going to go to Quadrant 3, where the reader accepts a weak book with open arms. And attempting to convince enthusiastic young readers that a book is not worthy of devotion is foolish and often counterproductive. They have tried it, and they've liked it. All we can do and should do is continue to mention and offer different titles that might appeal to those readers. Allowing individual response is wisest in the long run. And when we look at Quadrant 2, for me personally, book of high literary merit but low response on my part is The Book Thief. I have had so many people tell me that's such a great book, it's a wonderful book, it's won awards and yada yada, but I just can't read it. I have tried and tried and tried, but I just can't read it. And another that goes along the same way is, for me, The Lord of the Rings. I love the storyline, the movies that Peter Jackson created, the world of The Lord of the Rings is just amazing. But I just can't read it. It's a well-written, well, maybe I shouldn't say a great written book, but it's a well-written book, a piece of literary, with literary merit, but I just can't get into it. And then in Quadrant 3, for me, well, not for me, I should say, but for a lot of people, I put the Twilight series in Quadrant 3. Because there's not really a lot of literary merit in those books, but my gosh, people just eat them up. And then another one that might be more relevant to especially elementary, middle school age kids, I know I have a daughter that reads them, are the Captain Underpants books. You get complaints about those all the time because they're just crazy, stupid, but kids love them. The Goosebumps series, the Nancy Drew series, the Hardy Boys, those are all examples of books that have pretty low literary merit. They're not really high quality books, but people eat them up because it's because of their taste. So what we want to do then is to continue to encourage readers to choose books from Quadrant 1. And the way to do that is to enthusiastically say, here, yes, this is great, try it, see what you think. But also to realize that sometimes they're not going to have a positive response and that that's okay. But we also need to realize that just because they have a positive response to a book, say like in Quadrant 3 with very low quality, doesn't mean we need to bash those books. We might not want to always encourage those books. We'll want to find works that have kind of those same themes, but are better written books, so that we can hopefully move them to Quadrant 1. Books of high literary quality and merit that they're going to say, yes, I really like that book. But it's okay if they don't, because they're reading, and that's the point. So I think, for me, Quadrants 1, 2, and 3 are all very important. We want people to read what we consider good books, but we also need to realize that we want them to read. So it's a matter of encouragement and finding a balance. So as George Woods a children's book critic for the New York Times, said in an address to an auditorium of college students, "How do we know a good book?" He asked his audience. "We know a good book because it hits us in the gut." So to become truly engaged readers, children have to have the freedom to accept or reject a title. Just as we can't insist on a positive response to a book of quality, we can't erase a positive response to a poorly written book. In the end, the question of what makes a good book is one of respect. Respect for the truly fine work of authors who pay their dues and create works of lasting value, and also respect for the response of individual readers who cast the deciding vote on a book's personal appeal. There is, after all, only one list of good books that is completely dependable: your own. So now we're going to move into recognizing a well-written book. How do we know if a book is well-written and it has literary merit? So if a book is truly well-written, the words between its covers are arranged in almost magical patterns that stir deep emotional responses in readers. The words do far more than relate the events of the story. The words make the book by defining character, moving the plot along, identifying the setting, isolating the theme, creating the tone, identifying the point of view, developing the mood, establishing the pace, making the story believable, and reporting information accurately. So to start, we want to talk about how precise vocabulary plays a role in the well-written book. So one of the great pleasures of language is to find in this fertile and varied vocabulary that is the English language the right word to use in exactly the right place. Mark Twain described the difference between the right word and the almost right word as being like the difference between lightning and the lightning bug. And the only way to learn the fine differences between words and develop a broad personal vocabulary is to be surrounded by precise words used accurately. The right words do not have to be fancy or complex. Even ordinary words can be right. In Julius, the Baby of the World by Henkes, the birth of Julius brings misery to his sister Lily. To her friends and even strangers, this former only child gives warnings about the perils of newborns. To a very pregnant woman she meets on the sidewalk, Lily offers this dire prediction: "You will live to regret that bump under your dress." So, choosing precise vocabulary can make or break a story. Simile, metaphor, personification, and imagery are examples of figurative language. All of these add specificity, clarity, power, and layers of meaning. In addition, figurative language is economical. It conveys meaning quickly and with emotional intensity. Figurative language can add power and insight to whole paragraphs. It is one thing to say that Winnie Foster was made to do housework continually, but in Tuck Everlasting, the author underscores the seriousness of cleaning in Winnie's household by loading the description with images of war. Winnie had grown up with order. She was used to it. Under the pitiless double assaults of her mother and grandmother, the cottage where she lived was always squeaking clean, mopped and swept and scoured into limp submission. There was no room for carelessness, no putting things off until later. The Foster women had made a fortress out of duty. Within it, they were indomitable, and Winnie was in training. When we read that paragraph, we get the solid impression that house cleaning in the Foster cottage is the focal point of life. So it's through that figurative language that the power and the emotion behind that seemingly simple everyday task is brought to life in the story. Then we have dialogue. Speech reveals character. When a person's mouth opens, truth emerges about personality, motives, desires, prejudices, and feelings. In Ira Sleeps Over, by Bernard Weber, Ira has been invited to spend the night at a friend's house, his first sleepover. When his older sister learns of his plans, she asks, "Are you taking your teddy bear along?" "Taking my teddy bear along?" I said. "To my friend's house? Are you kidding? That's the silliest thing I ever heard. Of course I'm not taking my teddy bear." And then she said, "But you never slept without your teddy bear before. How will you feel sleeping without your teddy bear for the very first time?" In this brief exchange between brother and sister, Weber shows the older sister's need and ability to control her younger brother with what appears to be an innocent question. But if speech is not natural and not as individual as particular personality, it depicts the characters as shallow and stiff, distracting from the story and consequently weakening it. Here's that same dialogue in a reworked version of Ira Sleeps Over. "Will you take your teddy bear?" she asked. "No, I will not take my teddy bear," I said. "I will not take it to my friend's house." "You will not like sleeping without a teddy bear," she said. "You will be unhappy." "Do not worry. I will not be unhappy. I am not a baby," I said. This dialogue is written with the primary goal of providing simplified reading rather than engaging storytelling, and really doesn't give you the emotion behind what's trying to be conveyed within the story. The sounds of words increase the appeal and strength of a story as they blend together, create emphasis, repeat tones, establish patterns, provide a cadence, and add variety. After 80 years, the rhythm in millions of cats still rings in the ear and burrows into the mind. Hundreds of cats, thousands of cats, millions and billions and trillions of cats. The rhyme in Goodnight Moon does the same. Good night, stars. Good night, air. Good night, noises everywhere. But because the eye does not detect the fine points of language as accurately as the ear, it is common for authors to submit their writing to a final check by reading it aloud. In two versions of Snow White, the queen questions the mirror in language that is subtly yet powerfully different. And we're going to submit these passages to a read-aloud test. Here's the Walt Disney version, which is actually a little different than what I have here on the screen. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest one of all?" And then we have the Grimm Brothers version. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of us all?" Uneven meter in that first passage makes it more difficult to read aloud. The cadence is rougher and the sound choppier. The language in the second example flows, falling smoothly and effortlessly from the mouth. The result is a more musical reading. The second also echoes an archaic form of speech that matches the once upon a time setting of the fairy tale. So it's important that as we evaluate the text, we look at and listen, I should say, to how it flows. How does it come off the tongue? Does it roll? Or is it choppy and difficult to say? I think the one here, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all," is close. But to even add more music to it, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is fairest of them all." That little word "the" in there just kinks it just a little much. Okay? So that's how music in language can create a beautiful story. And then we have understatement. Understatement occurs when facts and feelings are presented clearly in writing, and we draw our own conclusions without being told precisely what to think. as when we look at this picture here of Watson greeting Dr. Livingston. It just says, Dr. Livingston, I presume. And we understand from this simple statement that Watson has spent weeks and weeks and months and even years searching, trying to find Dr. Livingston, and how he realizes there he is. And we're presented with minimal but carefully chosen facts and details without any explanatory comment. We don't need an explanation of what happened to get him to this statement. Okay? So understatement is simply very brief showing. And the power of understatement is evident in Tuck Everlasting. Angus Tuck tries to convince young Winnie Foster, whom he has grown to love like his own child, not to drink from the same magical spring that has transformed the Tucks into people who cannot age or die. In the epilogue, Angus and May Tuck return to Winnie's town 60 years later and visit the cemetery. When he discovers her tombstone, Angus's throat closes, and he briefly salutes the monument, saying, "Good girl." No long discourses with his wife about Winnie's wise decision. No fits of crying or sentimental remembrances. Just, "Good girl." Understatement gives power to writing because of what is not said, and shows that an author trusts readers to make important personal connections with the story. And then finally, we have unexpected insights. And like life, good stories contain occasional small surprises. We live with characters as they work their way through problems, but may be delighted suddenly by an eye-opening insight about the human experience that comes from their struggles. For instance, Maniac McGee wonders why the people in East End call themselves black. He kept looking and looking, and the colors he found were ginger snap, and light fudge, and dark fudge, and acorn, and butter rum, and cinnamon, and burnt orange, but never licorice, which to him was real black. Well, that's absolutely right, we find ourselves saying. We were aware that differences exist within races, but did not see the general truth with such fresh precision until we looked through Maniac's eyes. So unexpected insights add depth and credibility to the story, while providing the reader with recognition and connections. So what makes a well-written book, and how do we recognize a well-written book? Well, in short, the standards for a well-written children's book are no different from the standards for any well-written book. The author treats the audience with respect and writes so that the text is honest and interesting. The literary devices employed to achieve that honesty and interest operate so smoothly they remain virtually invisible. The story and the information are so compelling that the reader sails along, engaged in the insights and precise language, and unaware of the talent and time necessary for making the final product appear so effortless. And as I've recorded, I have been reading excerpts from this book, Children's Literature, briefly.